Chapter 2, Skinless. Sexual intercourse is not intrinsically banal, though pop culture magazines like Esquire and Cosmopolitan would suggest that it is. It is intense, often desperate. The internal landscape is violent upheaval, a wild and ultimately cruel disregard of human individuality, a brazen, high-strung wanting that is absolute and imperishable, not attached to personality, no respect of boundaries, ending not in sexual climax, but in a human tragedy of failed relationships, vengeful bitterness in an aftermath of sexual heat, personality corroded by too much endurance of undesired habitual intercourse, conflict, a wearing away of vitality and the numbness finally of habit or compulsion or the loneliness of separation. The experience of fucking changes people so that they are often lost to each other, and slowly they are lost to human hope. The pain of having been exposed so naked leads to hiding, self-protection, building barricades, emotional and physical alienation, or violent retaliation against anyone who gets too close. Sometimes the skin comes off in sex. The people merge, skinless. The body loses its boundaries. We are each in these separate bodies, and then, with someone and not with someone else, the skin dissolves altogether, and what touches is unspeakably, grotesquely visceral, not inside language or conceptualization, not inside time, raw, blood and fat and muscle and bone, unmediated by form or formal limits. There is no physical distance, no self-consciousness, nothing withdrawn or private or alienated, no existence outside physical touch. The skin collapses as a boundary. It has no meaning. Time is gone. It too has no meaning. There is no outside. Instead, there is necessity, nothing else. Being driven, physical immersion in each other, but with no experience of each other as separate entities coming together. There is only touch, no boundaries. There is only the nameless experience of physical contact, which is life. There is no solace except in this contact. Without it, there is unbearable physical pain, absolute, not lessened by distraction, unreached by normalcy. Nearly an amputation, the skin hacked off, slashed open, violent hurt. My heart was open to you, says a man obsessively in love in The Face of Another by Kobo Abe, quite as if the front of it had been sliced away. This skinless sex is a fever, but fever is too small. It is obsession, but obsession is too psychological. It becomes life, and as such it is a state of being, a metaphysical reality for those in it, for whom no one else exists. It ends when the skin comes back into being as a boundary. The skin is a line of demarcation, a periphery, the fence, the form, the shape, the first clue to identity in a society, for instance, color in a racist society, and in purely physical terms, the formal precondition for being human. It is a thin veil of matter separating the outside from the inside. It is what one sees and what one covers up. It shows and it conceals. It hides what is inside. The skin is separation, individuality, the basis for corporeal privacy, and also the point of contact for everything outside the self. It is a conductor of all feeling. Every time the skin is touched, one feels. All feeling passes through it, outside to inside. The skin is electric, hot, cold, opaque, translucent, youth, age, sensitive to every whisper of wind, chill, heat. The skin is our human mask. It is what one can touch of another person, what one sees, how one is seen. It is the formal limits of a body, a person, and the only bridge to human contact that is physical and direct. Especially, it is both identity and sex, what one is and what one feels in the realm of the sensual, being and passion, where the self meets the world, intercourse being, ultimately, the self in the act of meeting the world. The other person embodies not one's own privacy, but everything outside it. To lose you would be symbolic of losing the world, says Abe's man in love. Naked came I from my mother's womb, says Job, and naked shall I return. Naked, stripped down to the elemental, human, fragile, exposed, and delicate, in birth and sex and death, the human condition is minimally this nakedness. Being human is also, as Leo Steinberg writes in his essay on the sexuality of Christ as portrayed in many paintings, the condition of being both deathbound and sexed. Sex is the dim echo of that original nakedness, primal, before anything else that is also human, later isolated in an identity hidden by it, insensate because of it. One is a social human being, ruled by conformity and convention, not naked. Intercourse recalls the first nakedness, innocent and basic, but the innocence itself is not recoverable. The nakedness is never again synonymous with being human. One's skin takes on a social function. Even naked, one is not purely naked. Social identity becomes a new, tough, impermeable skin. One's nakedness is covered over by layers of social self and emotional pain, rituals and rules, habits of being that are antithetical to any pure experience of being. Questions of what is human, what is being, suggest questions of what is naked, what is sexed. Questions of metaphysics are questions of sex, especially because in intercourse two separate people physically fuse, break out of the prison of separateness and into the prison of physical need for another, experience the pain of being separate and then the pain of not being separate enough. Intercourse creates a need for society, for humans outside oneself. It pushes one toward others who are in the world, separate, different. But that society interposes itself by creating the necessity for identity, by making rules, between two humans, keeping them separate even during intercourse. This tension is painful, lonely. Apart or in sex, the sex being doomed by the necessity, the inevitability of becoming separate, absolutely separate, again. The skin mediates between separation and fusion. Assuming that man has a soul, writes Abe in The Woman in the Dunes, it must in all likelihood be housed in the skin. The skin is a soft down-like bandage for the soul. Abe asks what it means to be human in human skin, and what it means to love past the boundaries of identity. In his work, sexual intercourse is a metaphor for the human condition, and it is also, as a literal physical experience, at the heart of human life and meaning. In The Woman in the Dunes, a man gets lost in sand dunes and is trapped with a woman in a deep hole in the dunes where she lives. He is kept prisoner there to keep clearing away the sand. Quote, "The village keeps going because we never let up clearing away the sand. To have sex with her. The sand rots everything, including his skin. It is a pervasive physical reality, coarse, intensifying every physical feeling and movement, every moment of survival. He has sex with the woman that is different from the sex in civilization. He tries to escape, fights the sand, is brought back. The whole is the woman. Being in it is like being in her. The sand is the burying, enveloping, suffocating, killing quality of sex with a woman, being surrounded by her. The sand on the skin, in the mouth, on her labia, brings the skin to life, to feeling, to intensity, to sex that is not alienated or abstract. In the end, the man chooses to stay in the hole, in the dune, with the woman. In The Face of Another, a man has lost the skin on his face. The socially tame sex he has with his wife stops because she is repelled. He makes a mask, the face of another, and sleeps with her. He wants to know her. He wants sex beyond the constraints of his identity, but first his real face, then his mask, keep it from happening. His wife has sex with the mask, but it is not breakthrough or abandonment. In the end, she has known him all along. It is his selfishness, she says, that keeps him from getting outside his skin and near her. He insists that it is the mask. To overcome the humiliation of having been known by her, fucked yet kept at a distance, he shoots her. In Abe's The Box Man, a man gives up society and lives in a box. The box is his skin. He gives up the box finally to have sex with a woman. They are skinless together. He is skinless without his box. She is skinless naked. When she dresses, their love is over, which is unbearable, so he locks her in the building where they have been living and cuts off the electricity so that in the dark it will be as if she were naked. In the end, he has cut off all routes of escape, and he sits in the dark waiting for her to find him. What one feels on the skin is overwhelming, sensual, dramatic, extreme even when ordinary. Quote, "He was melting away like wax. His pores were gorged with perspiration." The feelings have carnal associations, meanings out of a psychic depth. The man trapped in the hole in the dunes wants to punish the woman who helped trap him there. Quote, "At the very thought his hair bristled and his skin felt scratchy like dry paper. Skin seemed to establish an association of ideas with the word force. Suddenly she became a silhouette cut out from its background. A man of 20 is sexually aroused by a thought. A man of 40 is sexually aroused on the surface of his skin. But for a man of 30, a woman who is only a silhouette is the most dangerous. He could embrace it as easily as embracing himself, couldn't he? He wants to force her, to hurt her. Punishment evokes sexual feelings in him. Skin is logically connected in his mind with force because sex is what he feels when he feels the urge to hurt her. The different codes of arousal he describes are a gradual concretization of erotic need, thought to silhouette to getting aroused on the surface of the skin. Force is suggested by the skin because both to him mean real touch, but as someone still conditioned by civilization to have abstract sexual impulses, he is drawn most by the silhouette, halfway between the fictive and the real. In his mind he is nearly a shadow, as unreal to himself as she is to him. There is a shape but no substance, more than a thought, less than a person. The skin suggests passion, force, or morbid fear. Or skin houses the soul. This is repeated in more than one Abe book. Or skin is the mask that love strips away. In love there is the pleasure of removing the mask so that the lover is truly naked, beyond disguise, unable to hide. The skin is intimate, personal. Those who know its meaning revere it, keeping it from casual violation by those who are indifferent to it. Quote, "The box with its resident gone was like a deserted house. The aging process had apparently been rapid, and the box had weathered to the color of withered grapes. But at a glance I was able to distinguish that it was the discarded skin of a boxman. I instinctively inserted myself into the space and concealed the sloughed-off skin from the gaze of those passing by. The skin dead is a human remain, with the soul gone, still fragile, what was human in it transformed. Quote, the corpse of the box became a butterfly. If a butterfly is too romantic, then a cicada will do, or a mayfly. The cast-off skin of a chrysalis that has flown away. The skin encases the living thing. The skin peeled away still signifies the life that was inside it. The boxman, whose naked human skin is under the box without light or care, think of the skin of the infant buried alive, is tortured by the skin decomposing. Quote, the itching of disintegrating skin is more difficult to stand than any visceral pain. Torture where people are tarred, or the situation of so-called dancing girls painted in gold who go mad because of the asphyxiation of the skin, remind him of his own condition, imprisoned in human skin, unable to get rid of it, disintegrating. He wants, quote, to strip off my own skin, including the box, the way one peels off the skin of a fig. And when he and the woman are together, in the heat of love with no barrier between them, quote, a sultry wind is blowing between you and me now, a sensual, burning wind is blowing around us. In the force of the wind and in the heat, I seem to have lost my sense of time, but in any case, I realize too that the direction of the wind will probably change. Suddenly it will turn into a cool westerly wind, and then this hot wind will be stripped away from my skin like a mirage, and I shall not even be able to recollect it. Yes, the hot wind is too violent. Within itself is concealed the premonition of its end. The heat envelops them, outside time, and when love is gone, there will be no memory of it, no way of bringing it back through memory either. It will have the quality of a hallucination that has disappeared. A cool wind will come, the skin will be stripped of the heat, as if the heat would be forcibly torn from the skin, and once stripped of the heat, it will be stripped of memory, and this end, this cool wind and no memory, and the heat being stripped from the skin, is implicit in the intensity and the violence of the experience. The end of passionate love is built into its very intensity. Being enveloped, weighed down by something outside one that is overwhelmingly encompassing, is the experience of this sexual passion outside identity, the passion outside the control of the ego, which is the servant of routinized civilization. In The Woman in the Dunes, the captive is outraged by the indifference of the dunes and its people to his established identity. Quote, was it permissible to snare exactly like a mouse or insect a man who had a certificate of medical insurance, someone who had paid his taxes, who was employed, and whose family records were in order? The animal quality of life, with humans living in the unmediated brutality of the real physical world, not a physical world of human artifacts, is merciless. Without compassion for these identities, people construct in civilization. One lives or dies according to an impersonal, random fate. Human fate is not temporized by mental events. There are the hard exigencies of physical survival, which do not bend in deference to individual human personalities. In passion, too, the human does not have the benefit of personality. Instead, the wind or the sand or the heat beats down on the body, a metaphor for the vast feeling of necessity that encloses the body, making personality and individuality meaningless. The skin, the human periphery, melts or evaporates or hurts under the force of it. The sand in The Woman in the Dunes is life itself with its crushing disregard for personality or fairness or reason or the defenses built up against its unceasing and formless flow. Life here is precisely identical with sexuality, also crushing, formless, shapeless, merciless. Sand, formlessness, the antithesis of all form, is played against, pushed against, made an antagonist of. Skin, which is form, the crushing density of life, moving on past us and over us, burying us underneath it, is formless in its movement. But, quote, things with form were empty when placed beside sand. Form, barricaded human form, skin, seems empty against the density of the endlessly moving, formless sand, which is life, and its inevitable massive, incomprehensible brutalities, which is sex with the brutality of its omnipresent, incorrigible massive demands. Carried by life and sex toward death, the human experience is one of being pushed until crushed. Quote, no matter how sand flowed, it was still different from water. One could swim in water, but sand would enfold a man and crush him to death. The sand, because it is relentless and inescapable, forces an abandonment of the abstract mental thinking and self-involvement that pass for feeling, especially sexual feeling, in men in civilization. It forces the person to live wholly in the body, in the present, without mental evasion or self-preoccupied introspection or free-floating anxiety. At first, close to civilization and its ways, the man's sexuality is in looking. Quote, a sand-covered woman was perhaps attractive to look at, but hardly to touch. But the pure physicality of the sand slowly makes him concretize his own responses. The body is real in the sand, abstraction is useless. What he feels physically. The sand is so extreme, so intense, so much itself, so absolute, that it determines the quality and boundaries of his consciousness, which changes from being vaguely, dully mental to being acutely, if painfully alive in physical labor, physical feeling, physical survival. This is not pleasant or nice. It cannot be judged from a comfortable mental distance as physical experience and civilization is in fact judged. There is no escape into equivocation or effete human arrogance. Quote, and then his feet began to sink into the sand. Before he knew whether he was making progress or not, he was buried up to his knees and seemed to have lost all power of movement. Then he attempted frantically to scramble up on all fours. The burning sand scorched his palms. Sweat poured from his whole body. Sand and sweat blinded him. Soon he had cramps in his legs and was unable to move them at all. The sand causes physical response, even erection. Quote, a little flow of sand, along with his trousers, slid over the base of his member and fell along his thighs. Slowly but surely, with a pumping like that of a water pipe in which the water has been turned off, his member began to fill again. The sand causes tenderness, introduces physical intimacy between him and the woman. Quote, he joined the woman in helping to brush the sand from her body. She laughed in a husky voice. His hands became more and more insistent as they passed from her breasts, under her arms, and from there around her loins. Sand is carnal. His memory of it is carnal. He remembers, quote, the sense of shame in scraping away, with a finger he had wet in his mouth, the sand like burnt rubber that is gathered on the dark lips of her vulva. And then there is the final triumph, the final superiority of the sand and the woman, a physical triumph over him, achieved when he tries to rape her in front of the villagers, who have promised to let him go if he lets him watch. She physically beats him and carries him inside, and he recognizes that there is an intrinsic rightness in her victory, his failure. Quote, but the man, beaten and covered in sand, vaguely thought that everything, after all, had gone on as it was written it should. The idea was in a corner of his consciousness, like a sodden undergarment, where only the beating of his heart was painfully clear. The woman's arms, hot as fire, were under his armpits, and the odor of her body was a thorn piercing his nose. He abandoned herself to her hands as if she were a smooth, flat stone in a riverbed. It seemed that what remained of him had turned into a liquid and melted into her body. Sand is the element, the woman is the human being surviving in it. To him they are dangerous, the hole, the trap. He is afraid of what is to be sunk in them, without a consciousness in reserve to separate him and keep him afloat. Above they are life, and the woman is life's logic and purpose, otherwise it has no logic, no purpose. In this vision of sex, while the man is by contemporary standards emasculated by the failed rape, in fact, rape is supposed to fail. Men are not supposed to accomplish it. They are supposed to give in, to capitulate, to surrender, to the sand, to life moving without regard for their specialness or individuality, their fiefdoms of personality and power, to the necessities of the woman's life in the dunes, work, sex, a home, the common goal of keeping the community from being destroyed by the sand. The sex is not cynical or contaminated by voyeurism, but it is only realizable in a world of dangerously unsentimental physicality. Touch, then, becomes what is distinctly irreducibly human, the meaning of not being human. This essential human need is met by an equal human capacity to touch, but that capacity is lost in a false physical world of man-made artifacts and a false psychological world of man-made abstractions. The superiority of the woman, like the superiority of the sand, is in her simplicity of means, her quiet and patient endurance, the unself-consciousness of her touch, its ruthless simplicity. She is not abstract, not a silhouette. She lives in her body, not in his imagination. In The Face of Another, the man is a normal man living in a normal world, except that he has lost the skin on his face. He has lost his physical identity and the sense of well-being and belonging that goes with it. He is stranded, as absolutely as the man in the dunes, but he is stranded in the middle of his normal life. He wants touch, he wants love, he wants sex so desperately he thinks that he has lost his identity because he has lost his face. But his wife, who knows him even in this mask, leaves him because he is selfish. No loss of physical identity helps him to transcend his essential obsession with himself, and so she remains unknown to him, someone untouched no matter what he does to or with her when he makes love. Repudiating him, she writes him, quote, "You don't need me. What you really need is a mirror, because any stranger is for you simply a mirror in which to reflect yourself. I don't ever again want to return to such a desert of mirrors." Pushed by a deep obsessive force for sex with his wife, for her love, but also an increasing desire to watch her being unfaithful with the man he is pretending to be, he is unable to transcend the constraints of self-absorption. He gets closest to her when touch becomes a part of his imagination, a means of cognition when he is near her but not literally touching her. Quote, "Isn't it generally rare to imagine by a sense of touch? I did not conceive of you as a glass doll or as abstract word symbols, but had a tactile sense of your presence as I got within touching distance of you. The side of my body next to you was as sensitive as if it had been overexposed to the sun, and each one of my pores panted for breath like dogs sweltering in the heat." She is far from being an object or an abstraction. She is nearly real. His reaction is physical, hot on his skin, close to touch, closer than when he is actually touching her. When he makes love to her in the dark, touch is a form of greed. "I concentrated on capturing you in every way other than sight. Legs, arms, palms, fingers, tongue, nose, ears. Your breathing, sighing, the working of your joints, the flexing of your muscles, the secretions of your skin, the vibrations of your vocal cords, the groaning of your viscera. Like a man making notches on his bedseat, he uses touch to get as much as he can. His sense of sex is quantitative, each touch of her being capture, while he keeps count. Unable to get out of the bind of his identity, his self-involvement, his use of another as a mirror for himself, he is unable to touch her even when he touches her, no matter how much he touches her. He can count the amount of times he touches and list the parts he touches, but even inside her, on top of her, listening to the groaning of your viscera, he is not really touching her at all. He does not know who she is, and to know who she is, he would have to be able to forget who he is, both of him. Being naked is interior too, being stripped of ego and greed to touch and be touched. In Abe's world, the ability to know through touch is not peripheral to human experience, it is essential to it. Touch is a central form of cognition, taking the place of intellect and logic. Nothing substitutes for it or equals it in importance. The Boxman says, "No curiosity can ultimately be satisfied unless one can check by touching with one's hands. If one wants really to know another person, if one does not know him with one's fingers, push him, punch him, bend him, or tear at him, one can scarcely claim to know him completely. One wants to touch, to pass one's hands all over him." Touch is the meaning of being human. It is also, says Abe, the way of knowing what being human is, the way of knowing others, the world, anything outside the self, anyone else who is also human. Touch is the basis of human knowledge, also of human community. The boxman, who sees mostly legs because he lives in a box, is drawn by the legs of a woman. Legs, he speculates, are covers for the sexual organs, attractive because you've got to open the covers with your hands, the charm of legs being tactile rather than visual. Leaving his box to touch the woman, he puts one hand on her shoulder from behind. Then, because she does not resist, he comes closer. He tells himself, emphatically as I do, that I must forever maintain this closeness. Distance is unbearable, the pain is unbearable, he loves in the deepest human way. Quote, "Compared to the you in my heart, the I in yours is insignificant." When he escapes the pain by touching her, he escapes from time. Quote, "Time stops just by touching your skin lightly with my fingers, and eternity draws near." They touch all the time, even after they have physically separated from the intercourse. For instance, he sits at her feet and touches her leg, passing his hand over it as she peels potatoes. The garbage piles up in the building, but, quote, "When you're touching skin with someone else, it seems that your sense of smell undergoes a transformation. Nothing matters except being skinless, naked beyond nakedness, this sex that goes beyond intercourse, even as it is a metaphor for intercourse. Nothing matters except the need for touching each other that unites two people, physically fuses them, and simultaneously isolates them together from any society outside themselves, any need or obligation outside their need for each other. Quote, "We could not imagine things as far as a half a year in the future, when the room would be full of garbage. We continued touching one part or another of each other's bodies the whole day long. Passion, wanting to burn, races against love, which may stop. Not being the same, they create urgency and desperation. For the two people, touching each other naked, absolutely naked, and skinless, absolutely skinless, is life itself. And when the touching stops, when the intercourse stops, when one person is no longer naked, it is as if the skin of the other had in fact been torn off. Being naked takes on different values, according to the self-consciousness of the one who is naked, or according to the consciousness of one who is looking at the nakedness. The men are tortured in their minds by the meaning of being naked, especially by the literal nakedness of women, but also by their own nakedness, what it means to be seen and to be vulnerable. The nakedness of the women they look at, interpret, desire, associate with acts of violence they want to commit. The women are at ease being naked. The woman in the dunes, sleeping when the man is first there, has covered her face with a towel, but she is naked except for the light layer of sand that eventually covers her body. He thinks that her nakedness is a sexual provocation, but then, struck by the physical reality of his environment, the sand, decides that, quote, his interpretation of the woman's nakedness would seem to be too arbitrary. She might not want to seduce him. Instead, her nakedness might be an ordinary part of her ordinary life, quote, seeing that she had to sleep during the day and, what was more, in a bowl of burning sand. He too, he thinks, would choose to be naked if he could. The woman loved by the boxman is naked, quote, but she doesn't seem to be at all. Being naked suits her too well. The wife of the man in the mask is placid, stolid when naked. He imputes indecency and vileness to her, but being naked does not unnerve or expose her. To the men, a woman's nakedness is a nakedness beyond mere nudity. Being naked does unnerve the men. It is an ordeal, and being looked at is nearly a terror. The men seem to distract themselves from their own nakedness by looking at women in an abstracting or fetishizing way. The voyeurism, the displaced excitement, displaced to the mind, puts the physical reality of their own nakedness into a dimension of numbed abstraction. The nakedness of the women experienced in the minds of the men is almost a diversion from the experience of being naked as such, naked and, as the boxman says, aware of my own ugliness. I am not so shameless as to expose my nakedness nonchalantly before others. Men's bodies are ugly, unsightly, the unsightliness of generic man's naked body. 99% of mankind is deformed. It is this ugliness of men that makes the boxman think that the reason men somehow go on living, enduring the gaze of others, is that they bargain on the hallucinations and the inexactitude of human eyes. For men, the meaning of a woman's naked body is life itself. As an old boxman says, quote, "Her naked body should have been an absolute bargaining point for extending my life. For as long as I see her, I will not commit suicide." Men's nakedness is unbearable to them without the nakedness of a woman. Men need women to survive their own nakedness, which is repellent to them, quote, "terribly piteous." The boxman cuts off the electricity when the woman dresses, because then, quote, "the effect of her clothes too will end. If she cannot be seen, that will be the same as her being naked." Any means to have her naked is justified, because having her naked is life. In the dark, she will again become gentle. He did not want to kill her, to gouge out her eyes or anything like that. So he made a prison rather than let her go, locked her in a barricaded building in the dark, and now he waits for her to find him. In the dark she will seem naked, if he looks but does not touch. The men civilized in shells of identity and abstraction are imprisoned in loneliness, unable to break out of their self-preoccupation. They look, but what they can see can only be known through undefended touch, the person naked inside and out. The women are the escape route from mental self-absorption into reality. They are the world, connection, contact, touch, feeling, what is real, the physical, what is true outside the frenetic self-involvement of the men, the convulsions of their passionate self-regard. Wanting a woman to be naked with, wanting to be skinless with and through her, inside her with no boundaries, is, quote, "breaking down the barriers of sex and bursting through my own vileness." Failing means that the man is left alone with my loneliness. The skinless fucking may be like, quote, "the appetite of meat-eating animals, coarse, voracious." But wanting fucking without barriers and wanting preservation of self at the same time leaves men, quote, "surfeited with loneliness." The man tries in vain to hold love together, quote, "holding the broken glass together, I barely preserved its form." He wants love, but on his terms. Unable to transcend ego, to be naked inside and out, or being left alone because passion is burnt out and, quote, "when it is burnt out, it is over in an instant," the men use violence, capture, murder, violent revenge. Alienated because of their self-absorption, their thoughts of women are saturated with violence. They dream of violence when they think of the women they want. Spikes through her body, fangs in her neck, cannibalism. Quote, "First I shall woo the girl boldly, and if I am refused I shall kill her, and over a period of days I shall enjoy eating her corpse. I shall literally put her in my mouth, chew on her, relish her with my tongue. I have already dreamed time and time again of eating her." Their dreams of her, rooted in their alienation from her, are extravagantly sadistic, this mental violence characterizing their abstracted, self-involved sexual desire. They are also psychologically cruel, users of others, inflicting deep emotional pain, the cruelty being an inevitable part of their intense self-obsession. The wife of the man in the mask writes him that, as a result of his manipulations of her, she feels, quote, "as if I had been forced onto an operating table and hacked up indiscriminately with 100 different knives and scissors, even the uses of which were incomprehensible." The violence that the men dream and the violence that they do ensures that they are lonely forever. Only the man in the dunes is finally in a state resembling happiness, having been beaten up by the woman when he tried to rape her, having a chance now because he failed.